because I was always able to open up to anybody that I cared anything about, even a friend, much less your husband. And he was this way all the time I was married to him. Very evasive.
Was he gone for long periods then?
Yes, he was. He was gone for 3 and 4 months, sometimes out of the year, sometimes a less amount of time, but always no less than 6 weeks at a time. And he would act so bitter when he left. He'd get me all upset to where I'd tell him, why don't you leave, Joe? And so he'd act so sad, but he'd leave. And I saw later that he really intended it to be this way.
He was manipulating you.
Right, that's true. Mm-hmm.
Did he show any remorse?
Not really. No, it was just as though that was his line of work. Very dear neighbors that lived across the street from me. And they knew my husband, and they had known us for years. And so when Joe and I were married, and he would try to communicate with them, but I don't know if he was revealing anything to them that he wasn't saying to me. But these folks told me, they were first to tell me that Joe, in fact, was a priest. Many of my friends questioned Joe in their own minds, not to his face, but they thought he was a very strange person. They thought it was strange that he'd have so many absences from our marriage. But of course I took all the blame for that, not fully realizing that he was irritating me to the point of sending him away these times when it was necessary, in fact, that he was away. Because his church, I'm sure he had the calling that he had to answer, or the work that he had to do for his church.
At what point were you sure that you had married somebody pretty high up in the Roman Catholic Church?
When he had finally convinced me that it'd be wise for us to marry in his church. And I had belonged to the Seventh-day Adventist Church, or I guess I hadn't yet been baptized into the Seventh-day Adventist Church, but I felt that it probably would be smart to marry him in the Catholic Church. And so I went ahead, and then we went over to see a priest in Reno and was going to discuss being married. We had to go over to another office, another group of offices, and see a cardinal. And so when we went to discuss our marriage with the cardinal, Joe was rather talking down to the cardinal, and I felt this was sort of unusual, because realizing, just common knowledge, that people didn't talk down to a cardinal if they were Catholics. And I thought that to be a bit strange, and the cardinal took Joe. The two of them walked away, supposedly out of range of my hearing. And that's when I realized that he, in fact, was a Catholic priest. And he had told me that he was going to, what was that word I wanted to use? He wanted to excommunicate himself. And I thought, this is strange, a man that devoted to church wants to excommunicate himself. And then when I heard the discussion about the priesthood, I threw up the papers and I said, I've had it. I'm going to quit. This is it. I'm not going to be married.
When you heard what discussion about the priesthood?
Well, I could hear little bits about your position and this position and that position. It was just very scanty, but I knew that it was, at this time, discussing his priesthood.
How long had you been actually married to him at this time? About?
Oh, 6 years, I guess. I threw the papers up, yes. What I have here I gathered up. I noticed that even my divorce papers are gone, but I don't know what's happened to those. But you did see the papers, the wedding certificate that I have, and I don't know what happened to the divorce certificate.
Did you take any pictures of Joe?
Well, there were lots of pictures made, yes. We had many made.
And then what happened to them?
They were taken. I don't know where they went, but I don't have any pictures left of him at all now.
Did he take them?
I don't believe so. I don't believe so, but who knows?
But you don't have any pictures of Joe today?
No, none whatsoever.
You'd mentioned that someone had broken into your house and stolen.
Yeah, some of the things were taken from me, stolen from me, yes.
Who would want pictures?
There must have been something else packed in that box. I'm sure there was. Or, who knows? It's a crazy thing. There were quite a few things missing. Even personal pictures of my children, and grandchildren.
Now, he made a boast one day about Hitler. What exactly
yeah.
did he say about Hitler?
He said Hitler was one of our very good people. Hitler and Mussolini, he said, you know, were good Catholics. And he said also the Mafia. He said we have some good people in our church. When I showed him the book that I had gotten, written by Samuel Bakioki, he said, that's one of our men. And so he said, notice where it was published. And he turned right away to the area in the front of the book where it tells you published in Rome. And he pointed that out very carefully to me.
Are you telling me that in the same breath that he mentioned Hitler and Mussolini, that he mentioned Samuel Bakioki?
I'm not sure of that. I'm really not sure of that. I don't know that that was at the same time.
How did you feel when he said that? Did you think he was kidding you?
Yeah. I thought he was jesting a lot of the times. And I would question him about it. And he really wasn't jesting at all. But you had the feeling that he was. Joe was a very sober person, and it was difficult to know when he was joking, which was seldom. He was very serious. He had a serious mission within him that he carried out.
I was reared in Pasadena, in Southern California, which is only a few miles from Glendale, where Merle Vance used to speak on Sabbath afternoons in his discussions of the Catholic Church with the number 666 and how paganism had worked into the church. It was intensely interesting. Even I've used some of the things he has said even yet today. But he had these mimeograph sheets that he used to pass out that had the pictures that he had copied from his various publications. I know he did a lot of study when he went back to the seminary. He was studying on the connection between 666 and the Roman Church. And when he went to the seminary, some of the people there said, well, now we think we know that there's a Jesuit on the staff here. And we think we know who it is. Merle hadn't been there very long until he said, I think I knew who it was, too. Well, he continued his study, and he had pictures from the books that were printed in Rome by the church. And this is what was on these mimeograph sheets that he used to pass out. But at the height of his study, he took some of this amazing material which he had and took it to one of the leaders there in Washington and showed him what they had. This man, without even looking at the paper that Merle had, said, Brother Vance, that study is not for you. But he said, look what I've got. It's all here. It's proved. Here's the pictures. Here's the proof of it. There's no question. He said, Brother Vance, that material and that subject is not for you. Well, he was pretty downhearted. He went to his major professor, which was a professor of history, and he showed him what he had. This professor said, we want you to write your term paper on that. Well, he said, I'm sorry, but I've already talked with this leader, and he gave his name, and he says that I must not study this any further. So I don't dare write a term paper on it. Well, time went on, and some of his friends said if he didn't change his topic, he would never graduate. In fact, the major professor said that. So he did change his topic to something inconsequential. Finally, the time came for Merle's graduation from the seminary, and it just happened that this leader had been called to Europe for a year, and it was during that year that Merle was graduated. So he had his papers. Following that, this leader died, and a very close friend of this leader was talking with Merle one day, and he said, I know positively that that leader, that man was a Jesuit, because I was a very close friend of him, and I know this positively. Merle was certainly a good student. I remember him when I heard a tape of him recently. I recognized his voice. It was so thrilling to hear his voice again, because I enjoyed those messages which he gave. He was a good student, a fine man, a real scholar. Certainly he was a credit to this people.
The subject of Jesuit infiltration into Protestant churches, whenever that subject is brought up, it's often ignored, dismissed, or just brushed aside. For some reason, they don't like to think of this fact. The story I'm about to tell you occurred in 1939 at a Seventh-day Adventist institution, Washington Missionary College, located in Tacoma Park, Maryland. This was told to me by Dr. B.G. Wilkinson, who was president of the college from 1935 to 1945. Now, Dr. Wilkinson told me that he uncovered a Jesuit infiltrator at that time, in 1939. And this is how it happened. There had been a new Bible instructor hired by the board, and this man had been teaching Bible to the undergraduate theological majors for about 5 months. Now, Dr. Wilkinson had always encouraged an open-door policy, and he encouraged the confidences of his students, especially his theological students. Now, some of these young men came to him after a period of about 4 or 5 months, and they said, Dr. Wilkinson, you teach Bible differently than this new Bible instructor does. There's some things about him that we don't understand. He brings up doubts in the classroom, doubts about our theological position, about our doctrines. These doubts are then not resolved. They're left sort of hanging in the air. And they had other questions, which Dr. Wilkinson couldn't answer. It aroused Dr. Wilkinson's suspicions about this man. Now, the teachers had in Old Columbia Hall little pigeonholes, boxes where their mail slots, they used to put their mail in these little pigeonholes, and the faculty would come and pick up their letters. This one day, Wilkinson saw an envelope being placed by the mailman in the mail slot for this Bible teacher. And the letter was a rather long, rectangular, official-looking letter. And after the mailman left, Dr. Wilkinson stepped over to the box and he drew the letter out. And he looked at it, and the return address was a Hereford Road address. Now, Wilkinson knew that that was a Jesuit college. It wasn't located too far from Washington Missionary College. He took the letter and he steamed it open. Of course, this was an illegal act. But, when you're dealing with a class like they are, they've committed many illegal acts in their time. The assassination of princes being the least of their illegal acts. And the Jesuit motto is the end justifies the means. And Wilkinson thought, I'm going to steam this letter open. And if it's an innocent thing, I'll just close it up again, say nothing. He steamed it open, and inside he found orders from this young man's superior, telling the young man, outlining to him what he was to preach or teach in his Bible class for the next several months. Dr. Wilkinson reinserted the letter, gummed the flap back on. He called the young teacher in. He said to this young man, he had the letter on his desk, and he said to this young man, I have a piece of mail for you. And he handed it to him. And he says, we know who you are, and we know why you are here. You are a Jesuit. Are you not? The young man looked across the desk at Dr. Wilkinson. He picked up his mail, turned on his heel, and walked out. And that was the last they ever saw of this man. He never even stopped to pick up his pay. But he cleared off of that campus the very same hour.
When I was in detective work in Washington, D.C. during World War II, I was going home to Alexandria, Virginia from Washington, D.C., and when I got to the mall, there was two scholars, and they were sticking up their fingers for a ride. I said, I'll just pick them up and put them in the back seat and see what I can find out from them. And so when they got in the back seat and was seated, I asked them, I said, you boys are from Georgetown University taking the priesthood, aren't you? No, we're not taking the priesthood, they said. Oh, I said, you're scholars from Georgetown University taking something. What are you taking? They said, we're Anglican brothers. Oh, I said, the church has never told us what Anglican brothers are, nor much about them, and I don't know much about them. What do the Anglican brothers do, and what are they for? They said, well, we're taking studies to work with the Protestant churches and get them to come into do what the church wants them to do, and to work with them and work with us. And I said, well, how many of you folks are taking the course? They said about 780. And I said, how many graduated? Oh, some are between 780 and 700 or 800. No, 700 and 780. I said, no, how many graduated last year? And they told me. And then I said the year before that, and they told me, and I went back till we had about 3,800 people graduated and out in the field. And I said, well, what do you boys do when you go out in the field? No, I said, first I want to know how many graduate next year. Well, it said it'll be somewhere under 900 anyway. And I said, how about, what do you do when you graduate? He said, well, the first thing we change our names. And when we change our names, then we're allocated so many to this church, so many to that church, and to another church. And I said, when you go out to the churches, then what do you do? He said, well, first thing we do is look around for some nice young lady that we'd like to make an associate member with, and then we marry them. And after we're married, we go off to a Protestant theological seminary or school, and we come out a Protestant minister. Then we're taught to, in our course, to work up to the heads as fast as we can in that line, where we're supposed to work in. And I said, now, do all of you work in the same field? No, says some of us work, but we all work in the church trying to get the churches to unite with us and do what we want them to do.
So were these Roman Catholic students then?
They were, as far as I learned, from what I learned, they were Jesuits. I know they don't want to infiltrate the Protestant churches, but they infiltrate their schools. And I know one fellow that got to be teacher in the Methodist school, and as a result of that, a lot of the Methodist ministers today are carrying communist cards. They utilize anything and everybody to bring their means to an end. Right. Spiritualism and the papacy is as close as two fingers are on your hand.
One cult that started Fatima, okay, the cult of Fatima, the Roman Catholic cult, seems to be antagonistic to the rest of the Roman Catholic Church. Seems that they believe that the Pope that's in now is an Antichrist.
The whole thing is that Satan gets as many people as he can on his side. And by starting something else up, he can get more.
Oh, I see.
And he starts first one thing and then another. That's why he's got so many churches and so many cults and so many this and so many that. What he can't get one person on, he gets them on another. Mm-hmm. And the biggest thing that he gets most people on is TV. Mm-hmm. Satan has all kinds of organizations. Mm-hmm. But the Catholic Church is his one biggest, most extensive organization that there is in the world.
Yeah.
He has these others organized to take care of things, but and in some places he works, even destroys himself to make other things work out for himself.
What's the connection between Jesuitism and communism?
Well, that's a long story, but really, communism was really started by the Catholic Church, and the Pope himself is allied with them and a communist himself. They sent some Jesuits into a little town where they wanted to start Catholicism. Now this I learned from E.T. Babienko that worked with me on a lot of detective work that I did. And E.T. Babienko told me that after they had no success for a short while, they substituted the place with twice as many Jesuits as they had in the beginning, and after years they got nowhere. So they said the only way in the big meetings in the Vatican, where the headmen all meet, they said the only way we'll ever get anywhere in putting Catholicism in Russia is to take away the children from the parents and do away with the Greek Orthodox Church by training the children otherwise. And in their brains, this was all formulated, and they decided to put communism into Russia and to put hard-boiled communism, which is Bolshevism, and later bring it on to a de-Christianized Christian Bolshevism.
So the connection between Zionistic Judaism and communism then is, would you say that's a fraudulent story?
Yes, to some extent, and yet they use the Jews wherever they can.
So the Roman Catholic Church utilizes Judaism.
They utilize anything and everybody to bring their means to an end.
So these writers that point to the international Jewish conspiracy, drawing from historical material that appears to see the Jewish involvement in all this, may very well be part of the Catholic ploy to take the heat off of themselves?
Yes, and that's absolutely the truth. And have you ever heard tell of this book that the Zionism taken over?
Protocols. Of Zion.
Yes, I have one of the books. They're hard to get. I can get them if necessary for anybody, but I have ways and means of getting them. But it takes me a little while to get them. And when you get them, you better keep them to yourself. But here's the thing. When the Zionists got all that underneath, the Catholics got a hold of some of this material in these books. And now, what do you think that Hitler did away with all the Jews for? Is to get rid of the heads and the ones that would promote this Zionism. And they're doing what the Zionists proposed to do.
So actually, in reality, then, there is a Zionist movement, but the Roman Church is trying to take over it and control it for their own purposes.
They have a club of 300 at Rome that does nothing but figure out how they can do it and why they can do it and where they can do it and why they can go ahead. The war in Vietnam was nothing more than just using the United States to put in Catholicism into Vietnam.
What do you know about the organization of the Knights of Columbus?
I know too much.
Too much.
And too much to tell.
Oh, I see.
But I know one thing, and that is that they're a strong organization in the United States, and they have a lot to do with this here Mustachia Army.
The Ustachis?
Yes.
Are the Knights of Columbus also organized in other countries?
You bet your life
or
they
were
are.
They financing the Ustachis of Serbia?
Wherever there is in other countries, they're organized. Wherever the Catholics are in force, they're organized.
Well, is the Knights of Columbus an extension of the Jesuit order?
Well,
but into secular society?
They all work and with together. They're dovetailed.
Do you know anything about the connection between Roman Catholicism and Masonry.
They're tied in together.
Would you say Roman Catholicism actually manipulates and controls Masonry?
They've got to the place where they're in control of a lot of things, and they have a lot to do with Masonry. You know, one of the heads of Masonry, at the head of things, is a Catholic.
One night he told you that they run our church. Tell us about that.
His people run our church, he said.
Who were his people?
The Catholic Church. The Catholic Church run all churches.
He said that to you?
Yes, yes.
And specifically that the Catholic Church runs the Seventh-day Adventist Church?
Well, very much like that. I don't recall exactly the way it was worded. This is the impression that I got from what he had said, the statement that he had made. We. He always, whenever he said we, that was the church and he. He always included himself as the church.
From Jeannie's testimony about her marriage to a Catholic priest agent, we get a sense of the tremendous confidence that the Roman Catholic Church has now in her position of dominating the nations and its institutions. Very soon we're going to be locked into a period of terrible persecution, and there'll be many martyrs among the faithful Christians. Listen to the words of Revelation 17, verse 6. "And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus." She is uniting with the rulers of the world. Listen, in verse 12, "And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast." Rulers in this world will give their political power to a system, a political system that will be dominated by the papacy. And that system is going to make war upon God and his followers. In Revelation 18, part of our last message to the world is to tell the world, all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornications, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. That the governments of the world are in an unholy alliance with the Roman papacy, and God is going to judge them. I want you to listen very carefully to Dr. Hiram Duke's testimony as he shares their position in world politics.
When I was behind these locked doors, they told me that they were going to cede the South. And with what they told me then, I knew they were planning World War II. And I knew they were planning on bringing all the DPs and seeding the South with DPs. They've done it. They've got to the place now where...
DP is... What's a DP?
That's the folks that are displaced in the old country on account of war.
Well, one thing that's interesting is no bombs are dropped on the Vatican.
Well, my wife was the head stenographer in the Vatican, in the Pentagon at that time. And she gave all the orders and sent out all the orders to the big men. And she had orders to see that there was no Protestant flew over the Vatican and over Rome, because they were afraid that they might, through their own ingenuity, want to drop a bomb there. Are you aware that the head immigration authority in Germany was a strong Catholic, and that he let the men in that were trained in New York for the hoodlums that went over to do away with the Tsar and his outfit, and they were shipped by him into Moscow by getting one of their men into Moscow and shipped in boxcars, and this fellow in Moscow that got in their head went and opened the padlocks off of boxcars and let them out, and they went right up and did away with it.
Talking about Lenin and Trotsky.
Yes, sir.
Trotsky was trained in New York, wasn't he?
Yeah.
The head of a bunch of hoodlums.
Got to talking with E.T. Babienko about a lot of things. And we got in places where we wanted to know things. And we put on priest garb, dressed up like a priest, and he put on even garbs on beyond the priesthood. Well, because he spoke in 44 languages more fluent than I do in English, and his wife speaks 33 languages fluently. Why, and he understands enough in other languages right away quick, and he picks them up like magic. The General Conference used him for interpreter to go between a lot of these places wherever they needed him. And he went to Europe and went to Asia and a lot of these different things. And when he went to Asia, he was over in the Himalaya mountains, where it's so difficult to learn the language. He learned some things was going on in Europe, and he wanted to go over and find it out. So he took an airplane, and he flew over there, and he dressed up like a big head man in the Catholic Church, and he went in among these other men, and he purported that he couldn't understand their language. They had to get him an interpreter. So they got him an interpreter, and he understood their language better than they did. And he understood everything they were saying and everything they were saying about him. And that way, why, he fooled them to where they thought he was a high dignitary, and he went in and found out things that he wouldn't otherwise. When he found out when he went to Europe that they were planning on getting rid of the Greek Orthodox Catholic Church. And one reason they tried with the Illuminati tried to put a bank in Russia, and they couldn't get the bank in Russia because the fact that the Tsar was too smart for them. And so they said, well, the only thing we can do is do away with the Tsar. And
what years was this?
Well, this was way back in the time of before the World War I. They wanted to not only get rid of the Tsar, but they wanted to get Catholicism into Russia. And they were trying this before they tried to get the money bank in there. And when they sent, I think it was 1,000 Jesuits into Russia, most of them are centered around a little country town and a little place in Russia. And they tried it for over a year and they didn't make any headway. So they sent twice as many more in that area, and then they didn't get anywhere, and so they called a big meeting over in Rome of all the head folks from all over the world, and they planned on what they could do, and they found out that the best thing they could do was to get rid of the parents taking care of their children, to educate the children, and that way, if they took the children away from the parents, that they could control and get Catholicism in there later. So they put in hard-shelled Bolshevik communism, and they thought, well, we'll annul that and get a choice in that way later on and put in a de-Christianized Christian communism. And they planned all this ahead. And he learned this. When he got this information, and they found out that they'd done this already, and that they take their children away so that they could imbibe communism into the children and take them away do away with the Greek Orthodox Catholic Church. And then they could control and later get things into Russia, and control Russia. And they'd do away with the Tsar and the government and the whole works. And then they planned on doing it in World War I. They dined, wined, and educated 300 hoodlums in New York to do all this and to go over and take over the Tsar and take over Russia and put this Bolshevism in Russia. Well, when they got it all ready, they had already gotten their man. The first president that they really put in was Woodrow Wilson. And they had gotten him in office, and so they told Woodrow Wilson, you tell England that she don't let those men in the ship that you've captured go on into France and things going through, that we won't bring the United States in and won't do anything for you, and you'll be out of luck. And so immediately they let the ship go on into France and went into Switzerland, down into the dark forest, and the head man of migration was Catholic, and he loaded one of them on the train and got him into Moscow through one crook or another. And then when he got him into Moscow, he loaded the rest of the 300 with all their guns, ammunition, and money, $20 million in gold, in boxcars, and sent them in there. When they got there, this fellow that was in Moscow opened up the boxcars that they were sent to him, and out they come and went right straight up and took the Tsar over, and they were scared for a long time that they weren't going to make the grade, but they did. And communism was in Russia. Now, after they got that all done, then this fellow decided there's something going on, and I'd like to know a little more about some of these things. So a little later, he went over to a new part of the Balkan states and went in dressed up the same as he did before. And he found out that...
Welcome. You're listening to The Kevin Barrett Show, where we rush in to controversial topics where angels, like Amy Goodman, fear to tread. We're rushing into one today, that's for sure. I'm bringing onto my show probably the most controversial recent voice to suddenly be heard all across the 9/11 truth movement. Now, being controversial in the 9/11 truth movement means really pretty darn controversial, because the 9/11 truth movement is already controversial enough that, well, I know that having been hounded by drooling packs of state legislators and deluged with internet death threats and all sorts of fun stuff like that, I wonder how you could get more controversial. Well, my guest, Alan Zabrowski, has managed to do it. Within the past, few weeks, actually kind of building up over the past few months, Dr. Zabrowski has let it be known in no uncertain terms that he is convinced that the Israeli Mossad was behind 9/11. He's not the only one, but he's not one of the usual suspects. There are a lot of usual suspects, including probably about 9/10 of the Islamic world that thought that the day it happened. But there are other slower, more thoughtful, and perhaps better studied people, including folks like Dr. Michael Andrade, one of America's leading peace studies professors at the University of Minnesota, who has pretty much come to this conclusion, although not in so many words. And you can see his very sensitive and excellent work at gzmn.org. That stands for Ground Zero Minnesota. That's gzmn.org. And Dr. Alan Zabrowski, my guest today, is definitely one of those people, not a usual suspect, but an expert in the field of international relations and military affairs. He's got his PhD from the University of Michigan, right across the lake from me here in Wisconsin. He's known as a military affairs expert in general, former director of studies at the U.S. Army War College. And he just came out and said it flat out in a way that I haven't heard it from very many people. It was the Mossad behind 9/11. And of course, many of us in the 9/11 truth movement are scratching our heads saying, how can you be so sure, Alan? Sure, there's some evidence pointing that way, but there's a lot of evidence pointing at Bush and Cheney and people in the Secret Service and people in the Air Force too. So we'll hash all that out. But meanwhile, it is an honor and a privilege to welcome Alan Zabrowski to the Kevin Barrett Show. Welcome, Alan. How are you?
Fine, Kevin. Thank you very much. And I forgive you for being from Wisconsin, as those of us in Michigan call that open area to our west.
Yeah, it's the final frontier for you guys, I guess. Of course, I think
only
Detroit
in football season.
I think Detroit is the final frontier now. It's
Detroit is the South Bronx that happened to move to the west.
Oh, boy. Yeah. Well, fortunately, we haven't been hit by anything quite that bad, although working people all over the country are really suffering these days. And
that's an understatement. Aside from 9/11, just looking at the economy makes me glad I'm not young now.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you look back in the big picture, you could almost say that we had very strong overall economic growth with no major interruptions, really, just minor ones from World War II right up until about 9/11. And since then, we've been dead in the water. So tell us a little bit about how shortly after the 9/11 attacks, you actually published an article casting down on those attacks, an article that was overlooked pretty much by the 9/11 truth movement until recently.
Well, Kevin, it wasn't actually published. About 2 weeks after 9/11, a local journalist asked me to do a background paper for her, and then to revise it in the first couple of weeks of November 2001. And I did it, and then simply put the entire issue aside, completely aside, and paid no attention to it until after the Gaza strikes in 2008, 2009, and then a video I saw by a Danish demolitions expert, Danny Jolenko, in April 2009 on Danish TV, looking explicitly at WTC7.
And Danny Jolenko is actually Dutch, but they're showing it.
No, right, but it was on Danish. Yeah. But it was on Danish TV.
Yeah.
And I wasn't even aware that WTC7 had gone down. And so those two sort of galvanized me. But the initial one and the initial paper that I did, and I was just reviewing it this morning, and I normally don't read excerpts from papers I've written, although Mark Glenn was kind enough to read the article I'd done on Jewish nationalism. But there's some parts of it here, I think, that because the topic itself is very sensitive, as you pointed out, and I want to be very specific and very clear. And so, with your indulgence, I'm going to pull a couple of paragraphs out of it and just read topical sentences to give an idea of what I was thinking of and the questions I thought remained open, which is what this journalist had asked me to address, and that really formed some of my perspective on going into the whole 9/11 issue today. And the takeoff point, I think your listeners will understand why when I go through this. And the second part in November 2001, when I revised it, was in response to something that Susan Sontag wrote about the media and Bush in an article in the New Yorker, for which she received an enormous amount of grief. And it occurred just as I was reading an editorial from a British wire service, I think it was ITN, on the evidence the U.S. had provided the British government regarding the culpability of bin Laden and company for the September 11th attacks. And ITN's position, their bottom line, was that there was no hard evidence. There was just an amalgam of supposition, allegation, innuendo, and guesswork. It bothered them, and it actually nurtured a nagging suspicion I had had then for some weeks. And that suspicion was that while bin Laden and his outfit merit eradication for other things they've done, they may well not have carried out the September 11th attacks in their entirety. I knew that lists of names and associations showing they did so were surfacing, and they may have been accurate. I had no inside information. I wasn't playing inside the Beltway. But I do know that the fabrication of false identities is really child's play in the intelligence community. And that given enough time, any decent intelligence setup anywhere in the world can manufacture evidence proving conclusively that, e.g., Mother Teresa orchestrated the September 11th attacks from beyond the grave.
That might be pushing it.
Well, that's pushing it a little bit, but not too far. I was trying to be a little bit dramatic for the journalist, and she laughed when she read it. Now that evidence wouldn't stand close scrutiny, but if no one cares or dares to scrutinize it, and that was Susan Sontag's point, so what? And besides, we began deploying forces to hit Afghanistan before they surfaced. So that made me see it in a rather jaundiced light.
Right.
But there were also some discontinuities in the way the September 11th operation apparently unfolded as it was reported. And one of them was Ari Fleischer's report that the afternoon of the attack, that they had clear and compelling information that both the White House and Air Force One had been targeted. And what I said to this journalist was, as a good press secretary, Fleischer might just have been providing the cover for Bush's absence from Washington and for some other things that the senior officials were doing. But if he was serious, I told her, then we need to understand that the information could only have come from a source that had prior knowledge of the attacks, and for some reason chose not to warn us that they were coming. And this is simply because, having worked in that community, in the hours immediately after the attacks, there was simply no time to review existing information in our possession, much less put out directives requesting new intelligence. So my questions at that point were, who provided the information, and why didn't they warn us ahead of time?
Now, by the information you're talking about, the report that Angel is next, meaning this was a threat to Air Force One that came through
exactly
on 9/11, apparently from people who had access to those top secret codes.
Exactly. Why